thank you for coming and Happy New Year. I'm happy to see so many return faces and some new faces. So thank you for joining us. First thing, Dr. Wong from the hospital is going to tell you and inform you about what's going on, and then I'll come back, and then our speaker will begin.
Hello,
Thank you
so
so much
nice
for
to
coming.
meet you.
Thank you so much.
So, Myra, thank you for the kind introduction, and good morning and Happy New Year, everyone. I'm so pleased to express our deep appreciation for the generous support Thursday morning talks have provided Mount Auburn Hospital for now 87 years. So, in fact, Thursday Morning Talks is the longest standing volunteer organization supporting the hospital. And I want to especially thank Myra von Turkovich, Amy Tilson, and the Thursday Morning Talks Committee for all their work to promote this wonderful series. We at Mount Auburn are dedicated to providing a healthier community. And to that end, Thursday Morning Talks has been incredibly instrumental. Most recently, proceeds from this series have helped build our beautiful healing garden, a place of respite and peace for our patients and communities who are undergoing serious health challenges, and also to renovate and expand our recently completed emergency department, where our patients can have a more welcoming environment and receive the right care at the right place. Thank you to Margaret Low and our distinguished speakers who generously donate their time and talents to bring these important discussions to our community. And on behalf of all of us at Mount Auburn Hospital, thank you to all of you who supported the talks and the hospital this season. Thanks so much. And I don't know if anyone else is going to introduce Margaret Low, but I'd like to take a moment and really thank Margaret for so much wonderful work she's done over the years in journalism. She's been an amazing journalist who I personally have followed, both when she was at the Atlantic and also before that when she was at NPR, and has returned now to NPR. So welcome.
Thank you. We just did my introduction, so here's Margaret Low.
Thank you, Myra and Dr. Wong. Thank you so much for inviting me here. It's an honor to be the first Thursday morning talk speaker of 2025. I'm so grateful to you, Dale Mnookin, for asking me to share my story and WBUR's story. Dale and Bob, sitting here right in the front row, have been such good friends to WBUR. There's a lot I want to share with you today. I want to begin simply because of the moment we're in. As a lifelong journalist, there are times when you feel like, am I a nerd to what's happening in the world? And I suspect there's nobody in this room that doesn't have friends or family in Los Angeles. It's, of course, a story we're covering. But I know it's also a very personal story for a lot of people, and a lot of us have been exchanging texts and emails and making sure our loved ones are okay. It's devastating to watch it unfold. And I didn't want to begin without mentioning that. So I hope everybody's okay. Being here with all of you is a bit of a homecoming for me. I actually, Mount Auburn was part of the backdrop of our childhood at good times and not so good times. I grew up 10 minutes from here in Belmont. When I went to high school in Cambridge, I left at 17 to go to college, and I came back 5 years ago to lead WBUR. And needless to say, there were just a few decades in between. I stepped into the job in January 2020, so my timing was impeccable. WBUR has always had a special place in my life. Even before I came home to run the place, my late parents were WBUR listeners and donors, and probably my real claim to fame in life is that Tom and Ray Maiozzi, the car guys, were actually my dad's mechanics. Do we have any Car Talk fans here? We always thought of Car Talk as the gateway drug, and Tom and Ray were hilarious on the radio. And it's probably good to know that not only were they funny, but they were also exceptionally good mechanics, according to my father. I do love reuniting with my hometown. I should say, just before everybody sat down, one of my mother's very best friends in the world, her daughter Liz Asher, came up to say hello. So it is a real homecoming to be here. So I'm sure there are many more family connections to everybody in this room. And I've loved coming back to my hometown. My parents used to always say, everybody else's kids come to Boston, our kids left. I was the youngest of three. I am the youngest of three, and it was a gently chiding sentiment. And by the time I moved home, both my parents were gone, and they would have loved knowing that I had come back to a town that they adored to lead an organization they believed in. My big sister Julie always says, Mark, they know you're here, and I hope that they're right. So today I want to tell you a little bit about how I got to here from here. In my early 20s, after college at the University of Michigan, I moved to New York City, and I met an historian who was producing a documentary series for this place called National Public Radio, NPR. And the series was about labor history. And she needed me to carry a tape recorder all over the city and talk to people who helped build the labor movement. She couldn't afford to pay me, and so I got a waitressing job to cover rent and food. And I met incredibly colorful characters. There were men and women in their 70s and 80s, and we would sit knee to knee, often in very cramped apartments, and the tape was rolling as they told me their life stories, what shaped their politics, and ultimately what prompted them to organize a union in 1930s America, the Congress of Industrial Organizations, now part of the AFL-CIO, the CIO. And I produced an audio documentary back then that I proudly titled Hard Times and Picket Lines. And I was completely hooked on this world. I'm fascinated by people's stories that explain politics and history and the human condition. And as the late, great journalist and writer Joan Didion said, we tell ourselves stories in order to live. And that's how I found my way to journalism, making sense of the world, understanding why things are the way they are, following the facts, finding stories that make you sit up and listen, learn something new, and importantly, to feel something deeply. In 1982, less than 2 years out of college, I got a job at NPR as an overnight production assistant on Morning Edition, which meant my workday started at 1 o'clock in the morning. As a brand new production assistant, I was hardly in the storytelling business. One of my jobs was to write the game scores that led the daily sports segment. And we'd rip the scores off the AP wires from old teletype machines that clacked and spit out rolls and rolls of paper copy. And on a spring night that first year at NPR, I wrote something like this. The Blue Jays edged the Tiger 5-4. The Red Sox slipped past the Orioles 4-3. The Mets trounced the Phillies 8-1. And the Yankees tied the Rangers 4-4. Then I heard Bob Edwards, the longtime host of Morning Edition, read my words on the air. And the Yankees tied the Rangers 4-4. Tied? He repeated the word with utter disbelief in his voice. Tied? Then stunned silence. I was mortified. I did not know that baseball games cannot end in a tie. My brilliant, wonderful parents never took me to Fenway Park. It's shocking, I know, and a little hard to admit in front of a room full of Bostonians. In any case, as it happens, there was a rain delay, and that game had been called for the night, and the wires reported the latest score, and I ran with it. Facts matter. Truth matters. It's so easy to get things wrong. That mistake at 20-something probably taught me more about life and the world than many of the things I managed to get right over the years. Decades later, many decades later, when I was running NPR News, overseeing hundreds of journalists across the country and around the world, it was a very, very different organization than the organization I walked into in the middle of the night. But there was a constant. NPR's founding mothers. You probably will recognize the names. Susan Stamberg, Linda Wertheimer, Nina Totenberg, Cokie Roberts. These legendary journalists, they may not have been the boss, but they were totally boss. And they were stunning role models for a new generation of women like me. And I was fortunate enough at an early age to experience a world where it really didn't feel like there were barriers for women. And it was a world that nurtured storytelling delivered with a very human voice, the kind of stories that foster understanding and connection and community. And beyond reporting the news, there's also something about the immediacy and the intimacy of our medium that reminds us, I think, of our shared humanity, which is so crucial in these polarized times. And I want to move a little bit from memories to the moment we're in now and share a few things that you may not know about WBUR, just to give you really some perspective on our reach. And as they say on Marketplace, let's do the numbers. I'll begin with this. WBUR's local broadcast audience, more than 300,000 people listen each week. That's actually more people than the number of Boston Globe digital subscribers. WBUR produces more national programming than any other public radio station in the country. 6.2 million people listen to our 2 nationally syndicated shows, Here and Now and On Point. We have more than 1.3 million monthly visitors to WBUR.org. That's one of the largest digital audiences for any public radio station in the country. And we have 60,000 members. Nearly 18% of the listening audience contributes, even though they could listen for free. So needless to say, our members put the fuel in our tank, and we're oh so grateful. And like any beloved institution in Boston, from the symphony to the ballet to the great museums and hospitals, WBUR is really part of the essential fabric of this brilliant, beautiful, and the region, a more vibrant place to live. I often say that people spend more time with WBUR than some of the people they love most in the world. It's a little bit funny, but it also has the virtue of being true, and beyond reporting the news, I do believe that we play a critical role in the community beyond reporting the news, beyond telling the truth and telling it well. I believe that we foster a sense of connection and a sense of community. And our work has enormous range. National and international news is unfolding at a relentless pace. We just talked about the wildfires, the wars in the Middle East and in Ukraine. But closer to home, we're covering the pressing issues that affect people's daily lives. And I'm thinking about a recent story by our reporter Lynn Jolicoeur that aired on All Things Considered. The city of Lowell, not too far from here, has been overwhelmed by a growing number of people living in tent encampments in public parks. And the city's trying to figure out how to respond and how to create public policy to address the issue. And there was a moment that stuck to my ribs, was meeting a woman, Jessica Marassi, and she's one of the many people making their home in a Lowell city park. She's the one, the pink jacket and black hat. And a social worker, the woman whose face you see here, asked Jessica if she wanted to go into detox. She said, we can get you into a program today. But Marassi didn't want to leave her community in the park. And so we hear the strong pull of the streets in Jessica's voice.
I need these people just as well as they need me. And doing for them and taking care of them kind of fills that empty void that I have inside. And if I abandon them, then what?
You're like a mother.
I am.
Marassi is a mother for real. She says she longs to be with her children and grandchildren. She had a home and a career and 7 years sober before she relapsed into her alcohol addiction and then just this year got hooked on heroin.
This is my bottom, sleeping in a park. I thought I had a bottom before. That bottom had a trap door. I never thought I'd sleep in a tent or in a park. Never.
Now,
I thought I hit bottom. That bottom had a trapdoor. Powerful. And now Jessica Marassi, we learned, risks arrest living on public property. And that story is the kind of story that shed light on the housing crisis. And by meeting people like Jessica Marassi and city officials trying to address the crisis, we've painted a much more vivid and meaningful picture of one of the most vexing issues in Massachusetts and also across the country. And at the same time, we provide much needed moments of respite and joy. One story that comes to mind is Chloe Axelson's gorgeous profile of Mayor Wu, not the politician, but the pianist, as she was preparing to play Gershwin's Rhapsody in Blue at Symphony Hall with the Boston Pops. Maybe some of you got to see the Mayor play. The Mayor, it turns out, has been playing since she was 4 years old. And it's a really important part of her life. And when she became mayor, she actually moved a Yamaha upright into her office at City Hall. It sits next to a floor-to-ceiling window, as you can see. Oh, there we go. It sits next to a floor-to-ceiling window that looks out over Congress Street. And during her visit, without warning, Chloe just said to the mayor, why don't you play something? And the mayor picked a lovely piece by Chopin.
When you're playing the piano, when you really get into the flow, at a certain point, that brain memory and muscle memory and the keys kind of meld together, and it's almost as if you are part of the instrument rather than playing the instrument.
I'm curious to understand how the mayor's long study of the piano informs her approach to governing.
I think I have really grown both in my understanding of what it means to be in this role as a public servant and elected representative, and in my understanding of how my personal connection to the arts can play a part in that.
Before Wu was elected mayor, she was a city councilor for 8 years.
Listening to that story, I think what happened to me when I heard it is that Mayor Wu becomes a multidimensional person, not just, and an artist, and not just a human being, or, I mean, definitely a human being, not just a human being, but also a politician, not just a politician. And it's with this kind of story that I believe we build connection and a great deal of trust. And what's wonderful is that people really do trust us. Not too long ago, I was actually talking to a women's leadership group about WBUR, and I had the pleasure of meeting economist and former Lieutenant Governor Evelyn Murphy. As many of you probably know, she was the first woman in Massachusetts history to hold a constitutional office. And in the midst of a lively Q&A with a room full of women, Evelyn Murphy paused and took time to share what WBUR means to her and what distinguishes us. And she said, I find WBUR reporters respectful and well prepared. They ask questions that no one else has raised. I never have to be wary of gotcha questions. Consequently, I become more thoughtful, more candid, respond more rigorously and accurately. It's a classy dynamic. It was such a beautifully affirming sentiment, and I hear that kind of reference for BUR a lot, and we're extremely proud of our hard-won reputation for thoughtful, fair, trustworthy coverage, and we also know that there's a pressing need for this kind of journalism, and yet the number of high-quality news organizations is shrinking. Why, you might ask? And really because the old economics of our business can no longer sustain us. And like countless news organizations across the country, WBUR has seen a dramatic drop in sponsorship revenue, in other words, for advertising dollars. And that money, much of that money now goes to the tech giants like Amazon and Google and Facebook, who have zero stake in local communities. And we know that money isn't coming back. So with millions and millions of dollars gone, we have a big gap to fill so we can continue to serve this community in the most meaningful way. And we know we cannot be complacent. We've tightened our belts a lot. And we have a real entrepreneurial spirit. We've launched new initiatives to help fuel our journalism, and we have to do that because WBUR is and always will be free. There are no paywalls, and there never will be. We think of ourselves as a public good, and everyone has access, not just those people who can afford to play and to pay. And it's an important differentiator because we can't forget our core values even as we adapt to new business models and new realities. And so what does it mean? It means that philanthropy and membership are key to our future. And I believe that WBUR is key to our collective future. We play a crucial role in nourishing a healthy community. We know that without journalism, voting rates decline, so does civic engagement. Government is less responsive and more wasteful when no one is keeping a watchful eye. And I also believe that people begin to feel somewhat untethered and a lack of connection to one another, and that's when disinformation and misinformation begin to flourish. And we all know the winds in Washington are changing. We're likely to face an increasingly hostile environment for the work we do. President-elect Trump has long derided journalists as the lamestream media or enemies of the people. His pick for FBI director has threatened to come after journalists. I'm vice chair of the Reporters Committee for Freedom of the Press of the board, dedicated to First Amendment rights. It's a small world because Dale and Bob's nephew, Bruce Brown, is the executive director of the Reporters Committee. He was very pleased that I was going to be here today with his aunt and uncle. And we're both bracing ourselves, we're all bracing ourselves for what's about to unfold and, importantly, preparing for the important work ahead. There's also real concern about the possibility of reduced or eliminated funding for public media. It's worth noting, just because I don't think it's a known fact, that we get about 3% of our annual budget from the Corporation for Public Broadcasting, the CPB. That's about $1.5 million. It's a meaningful amount, but just a fraction of what it takes to fuel WBUR. On the other hand, for some rural stations, 25% to 30% of their budgets come from the CPB, and those stations are often in news deserts. For tribal stations, it's even more. Half their annual budgets come from the CPB. So we can't ignore the heightened risk, but we also have a job to do. And it's crucial that people feel like we're a trusted news source. More and more people are getting their news on social media, Facebook and X, formerly known as Twitter, TikTok, and podcasts played a huge role, as I'm sure all of you know, in the election, from Joe Rogan to Charlemagne the God, and anyone can find so-called news sources to affirm what they already believe. That means we have to ask ourselves that we offer something that feels really important in people's lives, to constantly say, are we serving people well, and how can we serve them better? And as journalists, we must cover what unfolds without fear or favor. Our reporting must be fact-based. It must be impartial. We are not the resistance. It's our job to reflect the real concerns of a lot of people in this country. We live in mostly blue Massachusetts. Kamala Harris won the largest share of the voters. At the same time, Donald Trump won more than a third of this state, and more than 1.2 million votes, and more than half of the country. So we need to go beneath the surface to cover the most consequential issues, and to do so with rigor, with boundless curiosity, and with a kind of respect that everybody is due. I believe that if you care about anything, whether it's the health of our democracy or the health of our planet, that supporting journalism has to be a priority, because without that, no one will have any ability to understand what's unfolding in their world or to make informed decisions. I also believe deeply in the work that we do, and I actually, despite what the litany of things I just ran through, I have a lot of optimism left in the tank. I wouldn't be here if I didn't. We just launched a new brand campaign, and we think of it as the accelerant we need to grow our audience and deepen the connection to people in Boston and beyond. And we want to remind people who already know us and love us why BUR matters to them. And we also want to expand the circle to introduce ourselves to people who don't know us at all, but might like us if they tried us. And what unites our audience, it's not age or demographics or where people live. It's that they're all curious people, lifelong learners, people who want a deeper understanding of what's unfolding in the city, the country, and the world. And so I'm going to leave you with this because I think it is a little bit uplifting, and it's our new brand story that really captures what I believe is the essence of who we are, and I hope it speaks to you. WBUR is your beacon in the storm. We cut through the noise and reveal essential truths, tragedies and triumphs, quiet moments, moments of joy. We ask why and why not. On some days, the news can break our hearts, but it doesn't need to break us. Our journalism expands horizons, sheds new light. With BUR, you understand more quickly, judge more slowly, see more nuance. Our stories are different. They're intimate. We speak to your head and to your heart. WBUR reminds you of our shared humanity because, yes, it's still there. WBUR, we build trust, one person, one story at a time. Thank you.
Time for
yes.
questions, and also, would you explain what this is?
I will. I would be happy to explain what this is. Thank you. I didn't realize we had these here. So I'm going to come out from behind my notes and behind the podium. So BUR turns 75 this year. We began in March of 1950 as a 400-watt station that probably the signal probably wobbled when the wind blew. 75 years later, we're the organization I described to you today. So we are celebrating our 75th birthday with the BUR Festival, which we consider a big bash for the city we love. And the best way to describe it is, imagine if the Aspen Ideas Festival and the New Yorker Festival had a baby in Boston with a Boston accent. That's our festival. And it's going to be, as we like to say, serious stuff and wicked fun too. And it's a combination of, we're going to kick off with Wait, Wait, Don't Tell Me. And on the first night, we're going to have a kids stage and lots of festivities on the streets surrounding WBUR. But we're also going to confront some of the most consequential issues of our time: tech, health, politics, all of those issues. And I hope you will all grab this. We're going to actually put tickets on sale, I think by the end of this month. And we'll send all of you an announcement so you can sign up. You can already sign up, but I think it's going to be a really interesting few days, and really our gift back to the city that has given so much to us. So thank you for asking. And with that, I'm going to take off my glasses, and I'm going to answer any questions that you might have. Yes?
Mark Zuckerberg.
What do I think?
I just want to know why. Why can't we have tax cut? And what is the end game for him?
You know, I did not expect to be asked that question. I mean, or to know, I couldn't possibly read into Mark Zuckerberg's mind. It is painful to watch people like Mark Zuckerberg run away from one of the closely held values of what I think is part of an American democracy. My guess, I mean, he is a bottom line guy, and he is concerned about his well-being and the future of his companies. So that, but I have seen Mark Zuckerberg. I have never met Mark Zuckerberg, and I couldn't possibly describe to you what he's thinking.
How do we counter as human beings? I'm not a Facebook person. I'm not a Facebook person, but how does one counter what he's doing individually?
Well, I think part of the question you're asking underscores the crucial nature of the work we do, right? I mean, he is one of the most powerful men on earth, with an enormous swing power. And it is hard to counter that. I mean, I've just described what happened to the economics of journalism thanks to places like Facebook and Meta and Google. And we cannot solve the rebuilding of democratic institutions in this country. We have to keep producing the kind of work that we do and reaching more and more people and having, I think there is a real deficit in this country, and it's growing bigger, of people understanding what constitutes truth and real information that they can rely on. So we are doing, in some small measure, what is our big part to counter that. And part of this is to make sure that news organizations like ours and educational institutions have the fuel in the tank to do what they do to counter the misinformation and disinformation.
Thank you very much. I listened to you a lot. I had 2 questions about programming.
Yeah.
You just changed your programming schedule. I really would like the BBC to go back to 9 o'clock because I don't listen to the radio at 10 o'clock. I find at 9 o'clock I'm still kind of lingering over breakfast, and the last few days, frankly, I've turned it to GBH because I've already heard 2 hours of morning edition, and I'm not interested in a repeat of the 3rd hour.
Except
So the
GBH
second-
is, oh, sorry.
Yes, the second question, and you can answer it. A few years ago, I think it is, Living on Earth disappeared, and I think at this time in our existence, we sorely need a program like WBUR that focuses on climate change and the environment. I also resented that it is on at 7 o'clock on Sunday mornings. Who's awake at 7 o'clock? So if you please bring back us Living, I know Kerwood is gone, but if you're bringing back an environmental program, put it somewhere people will hear it.
Right. First of all, thank you for those. Thank you for those questions. And what I love, even though you're unhappy with some of the changes that we made, that you care enough to say so, and that you listen closely enough to notice. I will point out that at 9 o'clock, Morning Edition is on GBH too. So if you're turning from BUR to GBH, they go to 10 o'clock in the morning with Morning Edition. Anyway, so here was the thinking. People surprisingly, first of all, it was really important to us to keep the BBC on because I know that people know it and love it and count on us for the BBC, and that it was a differentiator for WBUR. We wanted to be able to, our strongest program and the program that reaches the most people and that captures our journalism the best is Morning Edition. And we have a new host of Morning Edition, Tiziana Deering, who I'm sure if you listen as closely as you do, you've heard. And she is an extraordinary interviewer and host. And our goal is to get more of her reporting and more of our reporting so that more people hear it across the morning. And morning is one of the strongest parts of the day. So keep listening. Let us know if you, and one of the things we also will do in the 9 o'clock hours, potentially air longer versions of some of the stories that you hear earlier in the report. So for example, if she has a conversation with Mayor Wu, you might hear a longer version, or Congressman Auchincloss or Senator Warren. The other thing the other shift that happened is that Radio Boston is no longer on the air. Tiziana Deering used to be the host. And one of the things that we know now, just with the way that people consume news and information, is that a 1-hour show in the middle of the day is not the way to sort of get stories across that count most to people. So we're investing a lot of those dollars and some of those resources into making Morning Edition a stronger both national news report and local news report, and also to do some more digital reporting for WBUR. And Living on Earth, you're not alone in feeling that way about Living on Earth. People have loved it. I will say that environmental coverage is one of the most important beats that we have. We have an environmental reporting team that reports a lot on what's unfolding in Massachusetts, and in fact and it's also a strong beat for NPR. So we actually think that the environment and climate is one of the most important issues of our time. And again, sort of the way that people consume information, a 1-hour show isn't necessarily going to reach as many people as we want to across the day. The other thing is that we do look at what happens when people, who's listening to what, and if a show isn't getting a larger audience, it's important for us to have something that people actually want to listen to and will make them sit up and pay attention. But thank you for that feedback. I'm gonna let you.
As something of a follow-up to that, what you were just saying, have you found that there is a change, a shift in the demographics of the audience? And what's really behind this question is I'm very involved with college admissions. And the younger people are reading less and less and less. So how does that affect your audience and your how you broadcast and what you broadcast?
Well, I think you put your finger on a really important issue, which is that how people are getting their news has changed dramatically, right? That people aren't turning to, whether it's broadcast news or broadcast on television or radio, people are really moving away from that and getting their news on social and on video. And so we have to be really conscious of that. And as I just talked about our programming, investing in places where people are, and while paying attention to what has brought so many people to WBUR, actually focusing on some of the new ways people are consuming information. And that's part of the reason that we're focused on digital, we're focused on creating newsletters, we're focused on live events, we're creating a festival, and it really is to expand the circle and have more people know about us. And the truth is that as known as we are to the people in this room, NPR and BUR are not as widely known as it should be. And one of the things that has been true of NPR and public radio as long as I've been part of it is that there was a feeling that you built it and people came, and that's no longer the case, right? You have to go out there and you have to make a noise and you have to have people know you exist. And so and we're doing that both with a marketing campaign, both with how we're presenting the news and information that we produce, and we're more and more going out into communities trying to meet people where they are so that they're aware of what we produce. Universities are really, really important places to us. We're lucky to be on the campus of Boston University, and that's and those students are one of the first places that we're trying to reach people. Yes, in the front. Oh, sorry.
Thank you very much for this. We are so lucky not to be living in a news desert. I'm not trying to take away support from WBUR, but can you suggest ways that we can support communities that are in news deserts? Are there organizations that we might add to our philanthropic list?
There are. I actually, what I'd like to do is be more thoughtful about it, and we can prepare a list for you of ways that you can contribute. One of the things, a lot of foundations are paying a tremendous amount of attention to sort of the decline of local news. So there's a whole movement called Press Forward, which is everybody from the Knight Foundation to the MacArthur Foundation is investing in local news and trying to give grants to everybody from small local digital news organizations to larger ones. The American Journalism Project is also giving money to local news organizations, and the goal is to try to help them scale. But I think we could easily put together, if it's okay, we could put together a list of places to give. The Reporters Committee for Freedom of the Press, one of the things that we do is a lot of news organizations don't have lawyers, so we do a lot of pro bono work for small news organizations and representing journalists across the country. So there are many organizations that are actually trying to help fuel local journalism. And it's a perilous time for journalism, but it's also what you see in a moment like this is that it is it is a craft and a purpose that in some ways will always be, because people, A, desperately want information about their lives and their world and the place that they live. And there's also a hunger for people to tell stories about what they see and what they know. And you might, and I don't mean to flip subjects, but one of the things that's encouraging to me at WBUR, and my colleague John Stewart sees this too, is that there is no shortage of really young, really talented people who want to be journalists, right? They see it as a calling, they see it as a purpose, they want to be part of it. And so I think we will, with the right kind of support, journalism will continue to thrive, but it is more challenged than it's ever been. Great question. Yes. Sorry, I'm not.
Hi there. Thank you. This has been so interesting. I am very curious about what is your relationship with WGBH. You're both part of NPR.
Yeah.
I'm sure you're not rivals, really, but I'm just a little curious.
So no, it's a totally good and totally appropriate question. Susan Goldberg is the CEO, president and CEO of GBH. We've actually known each other for years. We first met when we served on the steering committee of the Reporters Committee for Freedom of the Press. And tell Bruce how many times I plugged his organization. So we've known each other for years. We're friends. We are also undoubtedly competitors, and so we have a good relationship, and we actually talk all the time. The leaders of all the major market stations, so everybody from Los Angeles to Philadelphia to Chicago to Dallas, are actually together essentially every 2 weeks, because we're all confronting many of the same challenges. We sometimes think we have the same job and the same staff because there's so many similarities. And we share best practices, and we're really, it's a very, very convivial group, and Susan would tell you the same thing. We're good friends.
How can we help you acquire WGBH? Major markets that have 2 national public radio stations.
Yeah. So I think it's a very, very good question. And people ask us about our relationship to GBH all the time, and sort of why 2, and it's a totally fair question. We are very, very different organizations. If you look at us, we are a small, agile, we have 200 people, but powerful news organization licensed to a major university. We've had this conversation. And GBH is a powerhouse producer of public television, and they also do local journalism. And I think people imagine that the notion of a merger is much less complicated than it would be. But you should also know, in talking about my relationship with Susan, that we talk often about ways that we can work together and do more meaningful work together. There you go. You got it.
Right here. Could you talk to us a little bit about the fundraising figure at 18%? Because that seems, to me, not very high with the membership you have. But is it normal for public radio or for all?
It's actually, so let me talk about public radio first, BUR second, and what that number represents. It's actually, WBUR has always been in the forefront in terms of fundraising. We've had one of the best fundraising operations in the country, and people turn to us to sort of share our best practices. It should and could be higher, and it's one of our jobs over the next really one of our most immediate jobs to focus on growing that number. What's interesting, if you look at the conversion rate, and that's sort of a term of art, if you look at the conversion rate of even sort of some of the most storied institutions like the New York Times, how do people go from being, sometimes consumers to being subscribers? The 18% is an incredibly high number. It's a very, very high number. And one of the things that's striking about public radio in general, and not just WBUR, is that it was sort of a long time ago that we understood the one-to-one relationship with our audience, right? And that we fostered that relationship for years and years. And it takes, John, you may know the number, I think it takes sort of on the average of like 7 years for somebody to become a donor. Is that number about right? And so it's a long game. And one of the stories that we're trying to share now, first of all, so many people have listened for years and years and years and love us, and as I say, spend more time with us than some of the people they love most, and don't necessarily give, and not because they don't care, but that they don't think of WBUR or journalism as the place where their philanthropic dollars should go. And I believe firmly that an organization like BUR is a pillar in the community, a beloved institution, and should be thought of in the same breath and potentially with the same dollars as museums, symphonies, hospitals. And so we're trying to tell a different story there, and really asking the people who support us to support us more. If you you hear that on the air all the time. Last year, when I wrote a letter to the community in April of last year and really explained what was happening, not just with BUR, but with journalism in general, people really rallied and they gave, and we need to find a way to sustain that and to get people to give more. And there are all kinds of ways that we're doing that. But what's extraordinary too, and has been quite moving for me, I didn't know that I was gonna love the act of fundraising when I took this job. Not that I didn't believe that it was an important thing to do, but I think what strikes me in the act is that people really, they really, really count on us, and they really, really care, and they really can't imagine a world without us in their lives. And so it's very moving that people actually give, and they don't have to, right? You can't read the Boston Globe without subscribing. You can't read the New York Times without subscribing. You can't read the Wall Street Journal without subscribing. WBUR is free, and it always will be. And that's a very, very powerful public service. And people thank us for it, both with their ears and their eyes, and by contributing.
Hi, I was just curious as to how you measure your listenership. How do you know how many people listen to any particular?
We actually have something called Nielsen ratings, and it measures audience, and we can even sort of look at the live streaming data sort of right away. So for example, the day that we changed our programming lineup on Monday, we used to see a dip when Radio Boston came on the air at 11 o'clock, and it was the first time we didn't see a dip when On Point went on the air at 11 o'clock, and the dip didn't happen with the BBC either. So we have become, over time, as one must, a very data-driven organization, right? Data doesn't lie. So we actually have a daily dashboard that we can look at the number of newsletter readers, the number of listening is harder, it's measured. Listening to our national programs is measured less frequently, but there's a lot that we can measure and pay attention to. And the next thing that's so important in that is actually saying, okay, what impact does it have? What impact does it have in terms of making people more loyal, creating a habit out of WBUR, and then we hope becoming a member. And we believe that sort of at the end of the day, one of our most important strategic pillars is editorial excellence, right? You got to be great. And if you're not great, if you don't matter in people's lives, if you can't give people something they feel like they can only get from you, then you've lost the ball game.
Margaret, how great is your concern that some of the automakers are now going to eliminate having radio available in cars?
So it's an issue. Cars, I mean, I think radios will stay in cars, but they're becoming harder and harder to utilize, right? People are listening to their phones in cars, people are listening to all kinds of things in cars, and sometimes it's even hard to find any station on cars. So there is concern about that, and there's a recognition that the way people listen is changing and will continue to change. And cars had always been such a strong pillar of where our audience found us, and so many people told us that after the pandemic, their listening habits changed. What I want to tell everybody in this room is that if you love WBUR, you can put us on your phone and listen to us anytime, any place, anywhere by just hitting listen live. We can even show you how to do that before you leave if anybody's interested.
2 more questions, first and second row, please.
Considering the magnitude of the news, international and national.
Stand up, Ted, they can't hear you.
Sorry?
Stand up. Has to be right at your mouth.
Oh, I'm sorry. Considering the magnitude.
No, it's
of
your
the-
mouth.
Oh, it's not on? Is it? Thank you. Considering the magnitude of the international, national, local news, how does one prioritize what is the most important thing to deliver to the public?
So it's such a good question, and of course, one of the things that has been, I think everybody heard the question, how do you prioritize international, national, and local news? And I think one of the beauties, the original brilliance of NPR and member stations is that it was inherently local, national, and international, right? There's no other media in America that has that constellation built into how it was founded. And there is always sort of, for journalists, a hierarchy of news, right? There's the breaking news, there's what's breaking and what's important. Like we know on a day like today, the fires are going to be front and center in terms of the national coverage. Part of what is important to us is we know we can't be everywhere and cover everything. Although I should say, and this is probably something that is not widely known, there are about 3,000 public radio journalists across America. So that in red states and blue, there are journalists with deep connections to their community, and so they can cover local news, but also when a big story breaks, they can also cover it nationally for NPR. One of the things that has always stood out about NPR, I believe, and BUR too, is that people can get the headlines anywhere, right? We can all find out what's happening now. We used to have to wait till 4 or 5 o'clock in the afternoon to know what happened in the world. And so part of what we try to do in distinguishing that so-called pyramid of news is actually thinking about what can we tell people that will add dimension to the story, right? Make them learn something new, feel something, remember something, share something. So we're not just thinking about the hierarchy of news and what's the most important thing in the world today, but what can we do that will provide special insight that somebody couldn't get anywhere else.
loudly, but I'll take the mic just in case.
Thank you so much. Just following on the education element and the stories, following up to a question in this room, your stories at fundraising time of the meeting have been powerful because they're stories. Also, the story that was asked of where does the 18% fit in? I think the numbers, by the numbers, was very informative, and all of us are educated people here. But it's interesting, when something comes at you free, you don't always think what's behind it. So in your Ideas Festival, which is a wonderful idea, you may want a seminar, a strand, to indicate something that's the financing, giving it a different name that might scare people, you know, but the story behind it, or the use of city space, which is such a wonderful space to enable people to learn more about how this happens. So just wanted to say thank you for your stories and just your thoughts on that.
Thank you, and I'm not totally sure I understand the question.
It's really making it clearer to people the financing and how it all fits. It's really the financing question.
And you're talking about asking about the financing of the festival?
Well, no. Using the festival as a mechanism
as a vehicle
to more widely educate those who arrive.
Right, that's really interesting.
Using city space
right.
as a mechanism to more widely educate. But certainly the Ideas Festival, or however you term it,
right.
should have a strand for people who arrive.
That's a wonderful
idea.
idea.
On everybody's mind, even if they're not thinking about it.
The suggestion is to use both city space and the festival to really illuminate some of the things that I've just been talking about here. Thank you for that idea. I like it. And I'm going to send everybody a note after sort of sharing some of the places that you can discover WBUR that's not just on the radio, and one of them is City Space, which is this beautiful state-of-the-art venue that used to be a bicycle shop on the ground floor of Commonwealth Avenue, and now it's alive many nights a week with fascinating artists and writers and newsmakers, local and national. So thank you for that.
Lots of very good.
Thank you very much for all that intense information. I happen to know what I didn't know before. I wanted to mention that next week, Dr. Henry Kriegstein, either way, Steinstein, is coming. He's an anthropologist and an ophthalmologist, and he'll be speaking on dinosaurs, which is off-piece for most of us, but I'm really looking forward to it. Have a healthy week, and we'll see you next Thursday. Thank you.